Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for being here with us today. Opening of the Bioarchitecture and Sustainability Week. Brigenti, I am the president of AES, the Energy Development Agency. AES is a no-profit association and energy-savvy company founded in Modena in 1999. We are primarily involved in the promotion of renewable energy sources and efficiency energy, and in support of ecological transition among local authorities and private. Our daily commitment is to spread the culture of sustainability with the involvement of universities, research centers, public bodies and institutions, companies, startups, trade associations, technicians, professional associations, and partners of European networks. We are connected today at the Bioarchitecture and Sustainability Week, a unique annual event to present previews on eco-design and sustainable living solutions. The event is organized by AES since 2004 with the intention to spread the culture of architectural and urban sustainability, innovation and energy transition. In the next 10 days, we'll have online webinars and seminars in presence here in Modena and also in Bologna. And for the first time this year, after 18 editions, we'll have 2 sessions completely in English. The first one today with you, addressing the theme of communicating climate change, and the second one on the 24th of November, next Wednesday morning, focusing on positive energy districts. This webinar in English are giving us the opportunity to invite international experts, as you can see, to bring the discussion level and to involve an ever large audience. It's a new challenge that we hope will lead the event to a further development in the next years. In AES, we strongly believe in the power of networks and in the importance of sharing knowledge and competencies at different levels with the diverse heterogeneous stakeholders. We are very used to work with and be part of large networks. We are ourselves a network of more than 100 associated, and in our daily work we are busy with the EU-funded projects and international team. So thank you for all of you that are connected today with us. And now use my colleague Francesca Poli, that is our architect that work with us on this topic, that coordinate the session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Benedetta. As said, I'm Francesca Poli. I'm an architect, and I'm responsible here in the agency for all the activities related to ecological transitions. And I have been working over the last years on the topic of urban regeneration and climate change adaptation strategies. That's why it's for me a pleasure to introduce you 3 networks, which are to climate actions, 3 networks with whom we share the mission to disseminate the culture of sustainability, energy transition, and the fight against climate change. Thank you for accepting our invitation to introduce this webinar and participate to the debate that will follow. So let's begin. I'm giving the floor to Laurent Labelle from Climate Kick. Climate Kick is a private innovation partnership focusing on climate innovation to mitigate and adapt to climate change. In AES, we joined the network more than 10 years ago, and we participated in the Pioneers program, first as hosts and then as coaches. So it's a network we working together for many years. Thank you. Welcome. Please, you can open your mic.
Thanks a lot, Francesca. Thank you for the introduction. So, as you said, I'm Lorraine Lebel I'm based in Paris, and I'm Innovation Portfolio Orchestrator at Climate Kick, which means I work with our network of public and private partners to support innovation and activities. So all kind of different initiatives that tackle mitigation and adaptation challenges related to climate change in cities, in landscapes, land use, agriculture, manufacturing. So I'm very happy to be here today, very honored to have been invited to participate in that session. I'm here today in part because Eit Climate Kick and AS Modena have been collaborating for more than 10 years now, along with the quite wide and strong community of partners here in Italy to really tackle these climate change related challenges on the ground, collaborative innovation. And in particular, well, we've worked together on education programs such as Pioneers and others I will tell a bit more on in a few minutes, and also on innovation projects such as in the past few years, a project Metropolis, which is led by at ISS Modena, along with partners Data Group, Fondazione Bruno Kessler and Polimi. More on this project because there will be a session next Tuesday afternoon dedicated to sharing the learnings from this. This is a project tackling mobility and really using communication and community engagement as key drivers to encourage urban generation through changing behaviors, changing perceptions of citizens and different actors, and in particular encouraging new soft and green mobility schemes, such as encouraging multimodality, encouraging really the connection of the inner city with its surrounding landscapes, etc. So this is an example of what we do together and really on communication and community engagement. So a few words to further introduce Eit Climate Kick and what we do and our style, let's say, of communicating on climate change and to act on climate change challenges. So we are a network and a community with partners, public and private, all over Europe. We are supported by the EIT, which is the European Institute for Innovation and Technology, a body of the European Union. And the core of our activity is to use systems innovation with the ambition of building a net zero economy and society in the coming years. So when we say systems innovation, what we mean is really looking at the bigger picture when we talk about climate change and encouraging action that is using all different that brought together can the key challenges and really make a difference in creating change in our society and economy. That can be, when we talk about levels of change, that can be finance, that can be policy, that can be technology, of course, but also citizen engagement, education, the ways we share information, etc., etc. So to do that, we work with universities, we work with research centers, we work with businesses, we work also with students and with professionals. And we have a wide range of programs to really achieve that. And when I think of the topic of communication and climate change, for us, as part of our activities, there are really, let's say, three challenges that we work with, which is how do you raise awareness? How do you make sure that people are aware? And when I say people, I say all kinds of groups that go from a student to the policy leaders. How do we make sure that these people are aware of the challenges that come with climate change, both in terms of mitigation, how do we reduce our emissions, also of adaptation, and how to make sure that our society, our communities are resilient to the impacts that are already showing. So is also, that is the first thing, and there is also a question of these different groups, these different actors. There are also different sectors in the industry, in the activities. How can we allow them or enable them to speak the same language and understand each other when we talk about climate change? This is a big challenge. We've seen it for a long, long time when we hear about the reports from the IPCC and the reactions that they generate, both from policy side, from citizen side. Like scientists, policymakers will have a different ways of sharing information, of using this information, of understanding this information. And we see that often there are big silos across these different groups that make it difficult to really be on the same page and collaborate to really go to impact. So how do we bring those different people together through communication, through community or action? And really the last thing about when I think about communication and community engagement as Eit Climate Kick is how do we encourage action through communicating action, or in other words, how do we tell stories that really inspire action? How do we show demonstrations of what can be done on the ground so that they can be replicated, so that they can be scaled, and so that they can be experimented further elsewhere in the world? These are really the three big questions that I think are important. And so how do we tackle that? Well, we don't have the whole solution. We have fragments of the solution, let's say. And as some of my colleagues put it, we are learning by doing. We are also like building the bike as we ride it. So this can be a bumpy road, but always a learning process. So, for example, we talked about education and building capacity of people so that we are able to communicate the climate change related challenges effectively and really train the leaders of tomorrow so that they are able to act. So we talked about Pioneers into Practice. This is one of the programs that we have that is really aiming to train professionals in a network of climate active organizations to really learn from their peers and be able to have the latest knowledge in terms of climate action, climate impact, to be able to be a part of that network and then come back to their organization or to their daily activities and really be the kind of light bearer, the kind of pioneer able to really bring forward new innovative activities and be a leader in what they do. So this is one aspect of it, really training professionals. But this training, it really needs to happen. It really needs to be available for everyone from a very young age and also across the educational life of people. So that's why we also do things such as a program called Young Innovators in schools, but also programs like the Climate Leadership Journey for students in all universities, all kinds of disciplines, for them to really have this high-level training, and also summer schools in which they can be in touch with entrepreneurs, with startups, with actors that are really on the ground for climate action. So this is one part of for education, and then trying to build the stories that can inspire really action. What we do is build activities that we call deep demonstrations, and that are really about bringing different people together for place-based action, participative initiatives in which we take an issue, we take a challenge of climate in a specific region, in a specific cities. We bring together policymakers, citizens, businesses to think and really together build a portfolio of experiments to learn and share the learnings of that, and try together to achieve impact. So that means in communication, also one of the learnings that we have is that we want to share the successes to make the situation progress, but we also need to be really honest on what works and what doesn't work. And what doesn't work needs also to be communicated so that we can learn from that, we can on that really solution that bring an impact. And we also need to be quite clear on communicating impact and putting figures where we can put figures, but that's another challenge. How do we evaluate and how do we communicate really what is mitigation, what is successful mitigation, and what is successful adaptation? So there can be a whole lot of different approaches to that. For example, in the project Landscape Metropolis, there is also the idea of training journalists on how to really communicate these challenges and be a part of the solution. But there can be lots of initiatives, and I'm sure my peers here will also propose other ideas, and that we'll have an interesting conversation today. So thank you.
Thank you, Laurent. Thank you for your contribution. We move now to the second speaker, Sara Giovannini from Energy Cities. Hello, Sara. Energy Cities is a network of over 1,000 local governments in 30 countries and has the ambition to empower cities and citizens to shape the transition to future-proof cities. The city of Modena is a member of Energy Cities since 1998, and last year it was confirmed in the steering committee. So us, as the agency, we are supporting our Councillor for Environment, which is one of the 4 vice presidents in the network activities. Thank you, Sara. Please, you have the floor now.
Thank you. And thanks indeed to AS Modena for inviting me to be here today. Indeed, to talk about a subject that is quite important for me, that is my daily job, and is communication for climate action. So indeed, I am communication and new policy officer for Energy Cities. As part of our network, local leaders can share and inspire, learn from each other to build a more inclusive and sustainable solution for their citizens. At Energy Cities, we showcase tangible alternatives that are deployed by, and we advocate to change political and economic governance. We want to help cities to foster the wide cultural change that is needed for a future-proof societies, indeed. So, of course, communication is very important for us and also through our work, we want not only to inform, but also to inspire collaborative action and change. So that's why communication is so important. Some cities are already quite successful in this regard, and we try to bring their experience and knowledge to other cities so that they can follow their steps. Some of these innovative actions are developed and tested with our support in the framework of projects that we are involved in and that we try to bring our members into. And that is actually what I would like to focus on now. I would like to talk about a project that is called Tomorrow. Tomorrow is one Horizon 2020 funded project that wants to empower local authorities to lead the transition towards low carbon, resilient and more livable cities. In the work of this project, we have 6 cities involved that are Brasov in Romania, Brest in France, Dublin in Ireland, Moucron in Belgium, Niš in Serbia, and Valencia in Spain. So we have a wide span across different countries. These cities are developing 2050 transition roadmaps, and they are trying to do that in a collaborative way. So together with citizens and involving other local stakeholders. So to develop these roadmaps, of course, communication is fundamental. Each city is developing an engagement plan. For example, Dublin is involved in this project through their energy agency that is called CODIMA. They rolled out a public engagement campaign to get citizens involved in the energy transition and to feed their inputs into actions that are going to be part of their transition roadmap across all sectors. The agency will also present and discuss options for each sectors and analyze feedback from citizens and stakeholders in order to finalize and agree the future pathway for the city. One of the other tomorrow cities, so in this case Brest, Metropole, they launched a commitment charter so that organization can choose to sign this on their own, so individually to commit to a set of actions. But public and private actors in Brest, they can also create a coalition to define and take action together. So this charter is a great example of stakeholder engagement and details the city's climate plan and provides a different option to contribute. So going from a lighter to more deep involvement in the roadmap. The Metropolitan government is also hosting discussions about the local 2050 roadmap via local stakeholders committee. They're also doing that through during public events. And this should allow the roadmap to really include different views and express a solution for different needs, being really the result of a collaborative effort and consequently make also its implementation easier. The other cities that have that are part of tomorrow have also been initiating similar processes. Now I don't have the time to get into all the details of each city, but I really invite you to look at the website of the project, that is citiesoftomorrow.eu, and to find out and really be inspired by this innovative communication and engagement actions. Indeed, thanks to an impactful communication, cities can really strengthen their local partnership and really get their inhabitants and stakeholders involved directly in the transition. So at Energy Cities, we came up with the term local participatory agreement for climate transition, that we refer to it as local pact to shorten it, let's say. So this would be a process that wants to translate the Paris Agreement at city level. And we recently published a comparative study analyzing very progressive cities in the field of engagement and transition management, and identify the, let's say, the minimum requirements to set up a long-term local partnership to act together to transform local. And these requirements can be around 4 pillars that are a knowledge-driven process, stakeholder engagement, shared decision-making and responsibility, and also collective assessment. So to really conclude, you can see, I mean, from our analysis, we really saw that science and knowledge is extremely important, it's needed, but it's not enough on its own. So we really need the other 3 pillars that are all in some way connected to communication for really to be successful in the climate action. And so that is why discussions like the one we will have today are so relevant. So I really invite you to have a look at our website. There is a lot of information on our communication and citizen project, energy-cities.eu. And I again thank you for having me today and enjoy the session.
Thank you, Sara, for your presentation. And now last but not least, we have Karl Ludwig Schiebel from Climate Alliance. Climate Alliance is a European city network dedicated to climate action. Its members, ranging from small rural towns to cities with populations in the millions, accept climate change as a global challenge that requires local solutions. The city of Modena, also in this case, is a member of the board of Climate Alliance since a couple of years, and us in the agency, we are supporting the Executive for Environment and Sustainable Mobility to define the strategies and work on the network activities. So thank you, Karl Ludwig, welcome. I leave you the floor.
Thank you, Francesca, and thanks to the Agency for Energy and Sustainable Development for the invitation. We have been collaborating quite fruitfully in the last years. Yes, Climate Alliance is a city network of 1,800 cities and towns in 28 countries. We are the only network with quantitative goals. That is, our members commit themselves to reduce emissions by 10% every 5 years. We started out in 1990, where the commitment was to cut emissions in half by 2010. And we then were so naive to think that by 2010, the problem would be solved. As a matter of fact, as you all know, it is not solved. It is not a crisis. It's not a climate crisis. It's a new state of affairs, dangerous, chaotic, but not a crisis. As a network of cities and towns, we are convinced that climate protection only has a chance if it is part of a more encompassing strategy for sustainable territorial development. It is not only a question of emissions reduction, and that of course has profound consequences on how do you communicate the problem and what do you embed your narrative. Measures to taken to combat or adapt to climate change need to take the big picture into account. The hurdles we are faced are not only environmental, but increasingly also of a social and economic nature. We cannot, for example, rely on high-tech fixes such as carbon capture and storage that only bypass the root of the problem, encouraging society to go about its resource-intensive business as usual. And even putting safety concerns aside, we cannot look to nuclear energy as the answer when we have no sustainable solution for the waste it creates. And I'm most worried, I just came back from COP26 in Glasgow, that nuclear energy is raising its ugly head again. So our activities are based on 5 principles. Fair, climate action must be just. It should be promote the well-being of the world's peoples, regardless of culture and belief and gender. Nature-based, not based on extraction and depletion, instead replenish, regenerate. Local, we are convinced that cities, I mean, that obviously combines us with other networks like Energy Cities or Eit, that we say the local level is the important one. Resource saving, use fewer resources, not use more of them, and diversity. Each town, city, and district is unique, and we have to make optimal use of the differences. That means we are convinced that there's not one size that fits all, but that cities and towns have to develop in their specific tradition and environment. If you go to our website, you can see how we go about these principles, exchanging experiences, collaborating with our indigenous partners. We are the Climate Alliance of European Cities in cooperation with the people of the Amazon basin, because we consider the global south an important part of the solution to climate change. We give advice to our members, we do campaigns, we lobby in Brussels, we manage together with Energy Cities and other networks the Covenant of Mayors. In Italy, we manage the help desk of the Covenant of Mayors, and this means we talk every day with many cities and towns and think we have a fair feeling what cities and towns can do, what their problems are in enacting climate policies, as I said, as part of a more encompassing strategy for a sustainable future of the territory. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you. It was really a pleasure to have you with us today, and you all gave a splendid introduction to the topic of the afternoon. And we are now ready to start a discussion and get to the heart of the webinar. which, as we mentioned before, is entitled Communicating Climate Change, meaning how to communicate the huge risks arising from the climate crisis. The involvement of local communities is a crucial issue to drastically reduce carbon emissions. It is a challenge that concerns everyone, and therefore we think it's fundamental to reach citizens and younger generations to achieve these ambitious results. We have here today with us Roberta Fulci. She is a journalist, and she's going to discuss those topics with Andri Magnusson and Mauro Van Aken. Unfortunately, Giorgio Vacchiano had an unforeseen personal matter, so he cannot connect now, but he was really nice and he sent us a couple of video answering the questions, so in some way we can have his opinion on the topic. Just one logistic information. You have the domande. It's like if you have any questions, there's on the platform the possibility to send us some questions. It's in Italian, it's domande. You can write it there and then we'll collect them, and at the end of the talk, Roberta and I will ask them to our speakers. So hello, thank you, Roberta. I leave you the floor and the conduction of the second part of the webinar.
Thank you very much. Here we are. Thank you, Francesca. Thank you, everyone attending, and I would like to thank AES for involving me in hosting this part of this session. This afternoon, we're not going to tackle technical issues, so we are going to talk to everyone, I hope, and we are going to speak about something that really is relevant to really all of us. So feel free to make questions, as Francesca said, because we will have time at the end of our conversation to answer some of your questions. So our topic today starts from the fact that we are actually facing a climate crisis, and everything we know may change deeply in a few years. So we should be frightened, we should be worried about it, but it isn't really just like this. So I would like to start from a little cartoon by Watterson portraying Calvin and Hobbes. So maybe our directors can show the cartoon to us. It's about the fact, here it is. Okay, so I'll leave you just 1 minute to read through it. Okay, so last minute panic. My question is, why are we not in last minute panic, or not even in last generation panic, or in last decade panic? This is not happening. We may say we are worried because we talk a lot about climate crisis, but we don't really feel it as we would feel about a war or about a pandemic, just like we saw. So today we're going to wonder why this is so, why we seem not to be able to understand what is going on. And also, we have two parts. So in the first part, we will wonder why we don't feel that we are in the middle of a global crisis, and then we will try to find out how we could change our way of talking about climate change so that we really start to feel what is happening. Also, because as long as we don't understand what is going on, we are hardly going to do anything about it. So this is really crucial. So we are going to do this with a number of great contributors. So we have with us Mauro Van Aken. Welcome. Hi, Mauro. Can you hear us? Okay.
Yes, thank you, Roberta.
Okay. So Mauro Van Aken is an anthropologist. He was born in the Netherlands. He lives in Italy, where he is a professor in anthropology at the Milan University La Bicocca. And we also have with us Andri Magnusson. welcome. Thank you both for being with us. I guess, Andre, you have your microphone switched off. So Andre Magnusson is a writer, a poet, and he's the author of many beautiful books. They are our guests. They both have written many beautiful books. We are going to talk about their works today. Thank you both for being here. We have a third voice joining us in video contributions, as Francesca said before, because Giorgio Vacchiano couldn't be here in person. So I would like to start from a picture. This is the photo of a monument that Andre Magnusson made, actually, in fact. So if we can see this photo, can you just show us the photo? It should be number 2. Okay, here it is. Yes, that's it. Okay, so first of all, Andre, can you tell us what this is?
Well, this is the monument that we placed on what is now a mountain, but used to be a glacier. This was the first kind of commonly known glacier in Iceland to be lost to climate change. And it was declared not glacier anymore in the year 2014. And there were anthropologists from Texas that got the idea that this first glacier deserved a monument. And I thought it was a strange idea, but they asked me to write the text, and that also was a strange task to, you know, how do you say goodbye to a glacier? How do you write an obituary for such an entity? Because normally glaciers should live long beyond a human lifespan, or it should not be within our reach to witness the failing of glaciers. So I wrote this text, and I wrote, took me a long time to kind of find the right tone, but then it was a letter to the future. And I wrote, Ok is the first Icelandic glacier to lose its status as a glacier. In the next 200 years, all our glaciers are expected to follow the same path. This monument is to acknowledge that we know what is happening and what needs to be done. Only you know if we did it. August 2019, 415 ppm of CO2.
Now, your work here, this poem, gives us a very strong impression, really a strong impression of our responsibility and of our tasks and what we should be doing and are not, in fact. So we know that scientific evidence is now a certainty. We know what is happening, and yet we are not so worried. You have been wondering for a long time now why we are not so worried. So what do you think is now stopping us from understanding what you wrote on that monument?
Well, I've been, and lots of scientists and thinkers have been scratching their heads, you know, why is it not so that we get the information of what is happening, why we do not react instantly, why we don't change our habits, why it hasn't deep political influence. And I think the answers are many, and it's probably complex. So one of the reasons is maybe the majority of us feel like 2050 is just does not relate to us. It's like we don't have installed proper long-term thinking. We are raised with the year 2000 as a distant future, and suddenly we just are not able to imagine 2050. Maybe it's because how slowly it happens, and there's an idea called shifting baseline syndrome. That is, even if you're in a civil war, you adapt to that as normal. You know, even now we feel like Corona is normal. You know, even though if somebody told us 3 years ago we would be living in these restrictions, people would say, no, never, it will never happen. But then now we're living in it, and we feel it's normal. So, and that's the problem with a slowly declining nature or a slowly warming planet that we feel every year normal, more fires or more floods, and then therefore we don't react. And then because we could also see it with the corona, that when there were great problems in Italy, even the people of London could not kind of translate Italy to London. It just like in a 2-week scale or something. So, and then it's also a question of paradigm shifts, because this is so fundamentally, like this challenges us in such a fundamental way. It can take decades, even 100 years, for like a new reality to take over and really change our worldview. And we can see that with democracy, women's rights, Christianity, or scientific revolutions. That and that's what I'm writing about in the book. But the problem is now that we don't have 100 years to understand the issue. So.
Now, you wrote a book which is called On Time and Water, and we'll see how time and water are two ingredients that really enter like strongly in this topic and in this discussion. But also we lack words to talk about climate crisis, because this is the first time we never had to deal with an emergency like this. So we go on speaking about climate crisis, climate change, and global heating, but it all seems to refer to an empty scenery. We don't really manage to find an image from these words. So, do you think we should also change our vocabulary when referring to climate change?
Yeah, so it's also sometimes issues and words become tired. So when I told my friends I was writing about climate change, they were all like, they thought it was very boring. And I was like, how can the biggest issue in the world, when everything is at stake, how can somebody find that is boring? And then I told them I'm writing about time and water, and they were like, wow, that's interesting. And they were saying, what do you mean? And I said, well, basically in the next 100 years, a single individual born today, becoming as old as my grandmother is now, will witness a greater change in the glaciers of the earth than any previous generation or any previous lifetime, a greater change in the surface of the ocean than any previous person in the world, and a greater change in the acidification of the oceans is actually greater than in the previous 50 million years. That is, so a single individual will witness a greater change of the chemistry of the oceans than not only all the ancestors of man, but 10 times the whole evolution of man. And that's where language collapses. That's when you're talking about something that is just, how can I say it's big to the 12th degree? And how can I explain to somebody that the change of pH in the oceans from 8.1 to 7.7 is the most alarming news he will hear in his lifetime? So the challenge of writing the book is how do you scale up language? And we asked for democracy. That is, we asked to be as citizens to understand scientific issues and health matters and other things that we would choose a leader to fix or solve, and therefore it becomes also the kind of civil duty of a writer, for example, here and now, to understand this and then explain it or incorporate it into other art. So somebody told me that, so there was a scientist that told me that people don't understand graphs, they don't understand data, but they understand stories. And so he encouraged me to weave this data into stories, and that's what I was trying to do.
Yes, it's true. In fact, your book is really full of stories. You have a main story, which is the story of your family, but then you had so many different stories entangled together. And many stories also are found in Mauro Vanaken's book, which is called Campati per aria. So how would you translate campati per aria in English, Mauro Vanaken?
It's difficult to translate because metaphors of the atmosphere has been changing a lot in all languages, but they're very present in the language. Probably rooted in the air or probably weathered. Weathered in English is not just weather, but it's also transitive verb, which means it has remained something very important. For example, in German languages, also Dutch, it's my original language, which show how the weather acts on us, which means that the weather is a subject. It's an agent, and we are sometimes object or entangled completely in this main environment that we have. But it's funny, for example, Campati per aria, rooted in the air, in Italian, also in many Latin languages, all the metaphor which have to do with the atmosphere have completely changed within the carbon economy, within the last century, completely changed their meanings. What is rooted in the air generally is thought to be not serious, not rational, not grounded. Rational things, serious things are on the earth. That's not on the frames for which we read our climate crisis, our entanglement in environment. It's one of the problems that we have in understanding and then also in communicating, but also in sharing climate change or environmental accelerated change. The meanings that we give, for example, to the atmosphere. One is, for us, atmosphere is not more a subject. For most of the culture is a subject. It's full of subjects. It's the main energy, no? And that's all the languages are rooted in the air. The main words, also anima, anemos. Anima is quite an important word in Latin languages, you know, the spiritual, which comes from, no? But how can we take seriously, give serious meaning to the atmosphere if in our languages, in our frame of meanings, we give what stands in the air, it's not serious.
In fact,
not by chance, art, literature have said something different in the last century, no? Have taken very seriously and also the beauty, but also of our entanglement in the environment, and the environment is atmospheric. But we have frames of meaning which have got opposite in the last century.
And just to confirm what you were saying about the fact that we perceive the air now just like something not really serious. From home, someone is suggesting I would translate Campati per aria like invented, not true, fake news. So not serious, definitely. But do you also think that we are lacking words? I'm thinking, for example, to an initiative from The Guardian that dates back to a few years ago, in which The Guardian published a little guide to talk about climate crisis in a better way. For example, they say don't ever say climate change, say climate crisis, because it's more urgent. Or don't say warming, but say heating. And also there were some rules for images. So instead of publishing, for example, the polar bear in the middle of nowhere with a smaller piece of ice floating in the water, show us the effects of climate change, of climate crisis. To follow the rules on people. So do you think that having a special attention to the words we use may actually change our attention, or would you rather say the opposite? We are not using many words because we are not understanding what's happening.
It's more than that. I mean, climate crisis, it's a very strong cultural and social challenge, and it's a symbol. As another writer wrote, Amitav Ghosh, it's a very epitome of a crisis of the imagination. What do I mean by this? It's not just the words, it's just the frames through which we understand the reality, which stop us in not just understanding scientifically, but in understanding the entanglement in which we are, and now it's even more surprising or devastating. No, what do I mean by this? One example is, I mean, we have a dramatic lack of metaphors. We had also in our culture, but many cultures where I've been working in the Middle East, and, we have a dramatic lack of metaphor of our environmental relatedness. Example, one is the notion of nature, which has become so opposite and has been fossilized so much within the carbon economy as that field out of us. So we can think really, and all the carbon economy and all the fossil symbolic structure of fossil fuel we had in our mind. So it's not just converting an economy, it's converting a symbolic meanings of our standing in the world. Is based on the idea that we are outside nature, that nature is all that stand outside, and very often it's not subject. For most of the culture, environment is framed, understood not as nature, not as harmony of nature. That's our concept. It's our need, and even more in the carbon economy need. But it's framed in social actors which are non-human. For example, I take, for example, the photo of Andre Magnuson in my teaching with students, because it's one of the few examples within national secular ritual, aside others of other Western cultures, where now they need, when they face the economical consequence of climate crisis, they face also the emotional, the symbolical mourning of what is happening in many cultures in the southern world or northern world. And what's interesting is that they make rituals or structures of meaning where they talk about subjects, non-human subjects, like a glacier. And that's a very important issue also within because another frame that impedes us to share, maybe also to share in a constructive way, in a generative way, and viable way of the future, what's happening is understanding the emotional level of the climate crisis and the social emotional level, which means if it's not that we don't react because we don't have information, or because there's not enough panic. It has been demonstrated also within IPCC communication level, also within how the media intermediate catastrophic images, that the way the climate crisis is framed as a natural event, as distant, as external to us, or it's too expert to be popular, it's too distant to be local. In my neighborhood, in my city, my town council, in my state, it's too technical to take into account the social and emotional patterns. It's too catastrophic, it's too fearful to be shareable, in the lack of frames, also of mourning. Because it's not the end of the world, that's definitely the end of a pattern of representation of the world, which is very much linked to the fossil imagination. The fossil imagination is in crisis, but there are many other patterns, like a culture demonstrate. These are called process of social denial. We are enmeshed in process of social denial. When something is unbearable or not understandable in the social level, or we are taken in the dilemma of complicity, of accelerated change, of fear and anguish for the future of my children, of our children, we in the lack of social, administrative, national frames that take into account, take care of them.
I'm afraid
we hide the issue because they're unbearable. So it's not that we do not act because we don't know.
Okay, we saw you frozen for an instant, but then we managed to catch what you said, so it's perfectly clear. I would like to ask all of you, the three of you, so also our third guest, to share with us a little bit of your own experience. So since we know that even scientists, even if they have data at hand, they don't necessarily gather what is really at stake, just like all of us, because it's unbearable, it's too much, or we can't really figure out what we are talking about. So in his first contribution, Giorgio Vacchiano, who is a researcher in forest management at the Milan University, he told us when and how something about climate crisis hit his mind the worst. So the moment when he really saw with his eyes how important this was. So we can watch the first contribution from Giorgio Vacchiano.
I think the strongest emotion that I felt dealing with the effects of climate change was in Louisiana in 2005. I was in the United States at that time. It were the weeks right after Hurricane Katrina that had hit New Orleans, Louisiana, and Mississippi quite hard. And as we were driving with fellow foresters, go and inspect the state of the forest after being hit by the hurricane and by its winds, we would be driving across suburbs and neighborhoods that were strongly hit by the hurricane. And what struck me the most was that the most affected people were the most vulnerable ones: communities of color, poor people, jobless people. These are usually the people that also have the fewest resources to come back after such a disaster, to try and recover, to build a new house, to find a new job, to be safe once again. And this is true for all events and all issues of climate change, including forest fires. Some scientific research some months ago proves and shows that forest fires do not hit people equally in the same manner, but native people, again, communities of color, are the most hit because they have the fewest means to build back after such events. So this is true also for ecosystems. We have to understand which are the most vulnerable ones in order to give priority to improve resistance and resilience of those very ecosystems. And this is true also for people. Let's remember that the climate crisis is in fact a matter of social and economic justice. Not all people are hit equally. We have to give priority to the most vulnerable people, starting from our cities. Even here in Italy, in Western Europe, summer heat waves, for example, can be dangerous for homeless people, for elderlies, for people that cannot afford air conditioning or other refreshment and cooling systems. So let us bear this in mind, both in our cities, in our communities, and also globally, by paying attention to the rights of people and the vulnerabilities of people that are in danger of suffering the most.
So whoever witnessed an extreme event, just like happened to Giorgio Vacchiano, I guess you start to have a different point of view on climate crisis. How about you two? You, Mauro Vanaken, you refer to children before. That is maybe the strongest way of starting to perceive what is going to happen within the next 50 years. If you think of the first time that you really realized what is at stake, what was for you the moment in which you really you caught the dimension, the size of the problem?
It probably has to be, the dimension is I've been working in environment also, not as a academician. I've been working as a vineyard for 15 years before becoming professor. So I was quite close to what was happening around the environment in northern Italy. But also, the main shift is when I saw that I didn't have the word to speak with my son. Let's say very simply. And of course, this is enlarged in many public contexts in which a professor, for example, teaches, being a teacher and talking. And of course, the main shift was extreme events which were already normal in terms of aridity in the Middle East. And of course, I was witnessing them since the 90s. The aridity became stronger and stronger, or the extreme events. But I think what changes is that I realized also, and this I learned in other cultural contexts, but also in Italy. I mean, that there's not just communicating catastrophe or panic. That's the worst step. One thing is understanding and showing how much we are in Anthropocene, how much we are shifting a kind of in a climate regime, and we would like not to shift too much. And Anthropocene is understanding that many natural objects reappear as subject. But as what I've learned from many cultural contexts, also at the popular level, from local knowledge and rural productions, also in Pakistan, is one important thing that we should start communicating here, talking about climate crisis, which is cultures have always valued interdependence with non-human agents, not just in cosmology, in their daily practices with water, in irrigation. I've been working with water systems. I mean, knowing that you're interdependent to something which is sacred, to something which is strong, to something which is not infinite, to something which is not at disposal. And as water, many other agents of the environment to which we are interdependent. What I've learned is communicating and understanding the fragility of human beings in relation, communicating and understanding interdependence. We should start communicating interdependence, but not just as human, as societies, which is already something at stake in this period of many declarations of independence, but interdependence with non-human agents, because the Anthropocene challenges that, and those kind of relatedness and the change we can do in our economy, which is technical, but it's very much social, and also in the imagination we have in our position of the world, are not just limits, are not just something going back to the history. They talk about desires of relationships, of desires of change. They make the future viable in a very other different paradigms, which is not something dystopic or different. It's taking back what culture had always taught us in the very practical life, is that human beings are related to other environmental actors, non-human agents.
All of this is really quite evident in the video we're going to show you next. It was done by Andre Magnusson and a video producer, and it takes us back to 100, maybe a little less years ago. So let us have a look.
Það er best að hafiðinn byrja að segja þér frá fyrstu ferðinans. Þegar fórum fyrstu ferðina hérna á jökulinn, þá var eiginlega ekkert búið að fara þetta. Við kynntust heima hjá Guðmundi frá Miðdal. Það var svona fjallamannafundur. Svo var hérna 54, þá ákváðum við hér verðum við að byggja skála, sagði. Man vantaði ráðskúri í skálan og þá var ég svona rétt aðeins búin að kynna Söldu og ég spurði hana hvort hún var ekki til að ráðskúra við bygginguna. Og hérna á skemmtuninni voru hérna allir skíðafrömmiðir bæjarins. Og þeir spurðu hvort ég væri vitlaus að var að taka kvenmann. på vatnajökull. Já. Við vorum við tveggja manna tjaldi við vatnið, auðvitað.
Var ykkur aldrei kalt?
Nei, aldrei kalt. Brúðkaupsferðir.
So, Andre, was this for you one of the twists that made you catch what we are talking about, that made you understand how long a century is and what we are talking about? These are your grandparents, so we saw an episode of their life when they where they met, and then they got married, and they were going for an expedition on one of Iceland's glacier. And you used this story to explain what time is and how long a century is. Is that right?
Yes, so I was kind of thinking of these issues that Mauro was talking about, this air, this distance, you know, a glacier is very distant to us, and cold, and why should we care about glaciers, and you know, glaciers are also difficult, hostile environment. So when I was writing the book, I understood that just very close to home, there are people that love glaciers, and were the first people to explore them actually here in Iceland and measure them. But then also my grandmother, she's 97 years old. So I could also, because time is such an abstract thing. So like if I say 2100, normal people just don't feel anything. They just feel it's Blade Runner, or it's actually 80 years after Blade Runner. So I could give time a more tangible thing. And then when I'm trying to talk about my grandchildren, that's also intangible, because it's always theoretical what kind of people they will be, or and they don't exist yet. So, you know, how can I care about somebody that doesn't exist yet? But I found in a strange way that I could actually connect myself to the future by connecting myself with the past. So the stronger relationship that I had with my grandmother, and the bigger kind of character I established in the book of my grandmother, I could actually create simultaneously a feeling for my grandchild, because I just would have to flip her over the axis, like the time axis into the future. And I did an experiment with my grandmother. So I sat with my daughter in the kitchen with my grandmother, and we calculated when my daughter becomes as old as my grandmother. And that was the year 2103. And then we calculated, but when will you know somebody, like when will your granddaughter still be talking about you? If you, for example, tell her stories of grandmother, when will those stories still be remembered in a family oral tradition? And if your granddaughter becomes 90, for example, if you're lucky with old age, and she does the calculation and she comes up with the year 2170. So our time is the time of the people that we know and love, the time that creates us, and our time is the time of the people that we will know and love, the time that we will create. So in my book, I'm trying to create a more tangible kind of feeling for time, a more intimate, a more loving, close to home feeling of time, that of course we should feel intimately responsible for 2100, because we've already brought a human being into the world that we expect to be out there at that time. And all our decisions now are in a direct relationship with the challenges that those future offsprings of ours are meeting. And then the challenge is, of course, how can they be threatened by air, that is, by emissions? And that's where I'm kind of looking at poetry and mythology, because our minds are not like completely rational. We're also kind of emotional. superstitious. We have all sorts of mindsets, and for example, the word emissions, which is the threat, 35 gigatons of emissions, doesn't mean anything for us. But of course, where do these emissions come from? You know, the emissions are not in the Bible. We do not talk about the holy emissions, or there's nothing in any history, folklore, mythology, or poetry where the word emissions comes out. So it's a very kind of untangible word, even in culturally very unintangible. But these emissions are coming from fire, and fire is something that is in every culture, and something that is ingrained into our imagination, into mythology, down from Prometheus, since he gave us fire. So I was thinking, all these emissions are coming from fire, but where's the fire? Because we've designed everything so well, the factories, we don't see any fire. We don't see fire when we turn on our car in the morning. So these hidden fires are actually more than 600 times greater than the combined volcanic activity on the planet. So I'm trying to translate, okay, emissions to fire, and then fire to volcanic activity. And then you ask a geologist, when did the Earth have 600 volcanoes blowing simultaneously for 20, 30, 50, 60 years? Then that geologist would just point at some layer in the Grand Canyon where some horrible mass extinction event happened, or some major shift in the geology of the planet. So I'm using grandmothers instead of time, and I'm using mythology also to kind of underpin the science, because we are living geological time, because mythology is about the fundamentals. That is, mythology are the creation stories, the great floods, the great kind of when the fundamentals of everything are shifting. History is about human ideas and human empires and alliances and kings and all these things. But now we are meeting for the first time, like now in Glasgow, where they're talking about how they're raising the temperature of the whole planet, how they're raising the sea level, how they are merging glaciers with oceans. And that's something that Genghis Khan, Ramses II, sees that, nobody was confronted with this reality that your longings, your actions, your political decisions. So I can say as a writer, why are you writing this book? I'm writing this book because I'm hoping to calm the oceans. I'm hoping to prevent the sea from rising, which sounds like I'm megalomaniac, but it's a truth that we can write words, because these words are meant to influence people, to influence politics, to make laws that prevent the oceans from rising. So we are in a very strange connection now as humans against the planet and the fundamentals of our reality.
We really do hope to be useful even in this conversation. Why not? Of course, all this talking about the subject should have an effect. Before maybe half an hour ago, Mauro talked about teaching and the role of teaching and how much teaching can change our perception of the future. And in fact, this is exactly what someone told me recently. So I would like to talk to you, to tell you about Dava Newman. So Dava Newman is a scientist. She has been working at NASA for many years, and her goal was to take human beings to Mars. That was her dream. She was almost obsessed with this goal. But then her priority changed, and now she's, of course, she's teaching astronautics always, but also she's working a lot on climate change, because she believes this is now her priority. And when I met her recently, and I thought about the fact that both Mars, so getting to Mars, and facing climate crisis require a lot of imagination, because we have never experienced none of them. And so I asked her how she managed to work in practical on such strange things that may even never occur during her life. She doesn't even know if someone will get to Mars when she's still alive. So it really, a lot of imagination is needed. And she said that since she is a teacher, she's always in the mind of the people she teaches. So also she reminded about a piece of wisdom from Native American populations, which said that you should always live thinking about 7 generations after you, and this changes your way of thinking immediately. So Maura Van Aken, you have been living in many different countries, you have traveled a lot, you have been a vine grower, you speak, I don't even know how many languages. So can we borrow something from cultures different from, let's say, European culture to approach climate crisis in a more productive way, in a more useful way?
Probably a more realistic way. Maybe you can show, there was one photo of an aubergine I sent you. I don't know if you have it there, but yeah. I will offer you a Palestinian aubergine, but I will just tell you a story of this Palestinian aubergine. So it's in the occupied territories, so it's quite globalized context where making food, land and water are really uncertain, even more for the environmental change, not just for the very tense political situations for those fellaheen, for those farmers. But and that aubergine goes back to the knowledge and the familiarity with the atmosphere, which is typical of many local cultural contexts, which today becomes more and more important and teaches us a lot in realizing that we are even more rooted in a very serious way in the air. It's our main atmospheric environment, and we realize that today with the carbon emissions and the greenhouse effect, now that we are even more entangled since we are the producer of those huge festival of carbon dioxide. What is this aubergine? This is a Batiri aubergine, which is made with local seeds. Of course, this is a history of rediscovering local seeds in many parts of the world. But those seeds are called the Baali seeds. Maybe someone who listens can remember that Baal is something quite, I mean, well known in biblical text, but also in the Quran and in the main. It was the pre-monotheistic, one of the divinity in premise. It was the god of the tempest, of the rain. But why the god disappeared, of course, in the land of the free monotheism, but it remained in the seeds of those farmers today, making their foods for families, just for family foods. Why do they call it like this? Because this is linked to a meteorological calendar, which survived only in family farm, not in irrigated industrial cultivation outside. And also those seeds have disappeared, no? But they are reproduced within the houses. They are seeds which are made and were selected in the history to be rain-fed in an arid context. They don't want much water. They need a knowledge, and knowledges are technical, ploughing knowledge, but they are knowledge of how to make familiar the weather, when will really rain, in a context where it rains just 2 months a year. So it's quite strategic. So they kept a very cosmological knowledge, but it's also very pragmatic and typical of cultures, poetic and very strategic patterns of knowledge, which is called Ma'abaniya, which is a calendar. Imagine that also refugees outside Palestine maintained that calendar. I mean, refugees go away from their lands, but they keep as intimacy the knowledge of the air. That tells us how much cultures are really rooted in the air, i.e. they make solidarity of their place in relations to the atmosphere and to the knowledge, not prevision, knowledge, familiarity of the atmosphere as a living object. This is typical of many cultures. They conceive themselves as entangled. Today they reproduce those aubergines, and are very famous because you can do a lot of very nice kitchen dishes, and they're the part of their identity, and they don't want much water. They resist aridity, but they need the knowledge. And Baali, what does it mean? Means the seeds which is exposed to the weather, and the weather is Marbania, is that calendar. They know that human beings are exposed, which means being interdependent, being reactive to what changes, having flexible knowledge, and knowing that you are fragile, that you are dependent to the weather. We should rediscover that we don't live indoor. Our mental construct has been framed on indoor, no, in the Western world, and then in our works, even more university, imagine. But we keep being very interdependent, not just to environmental actors, but in environmental actors as atmospheric. And we need to rediscover that, to give meanings and shareable meanings, because otherwise we keep being only anguished by an atmosphere that changes, because we are not able anymore to give meanings, because we lost the social alphabet of the atmosphere that many cultures have. We have, of course, climatology, which is very important, but it's too distant from the experience of the social actors and communities at the local level. It doesn't talk to their perceptions. It can be translated, but it doesn't talk. And it doesn't talk very often to the knowledge of local community, which sometimes is very important also for climatologists to understand what's happening. The knowledge of local communities, for example, in forests, in arid lands, in even I imagine in the Alps, in Italy. This is very important because it's different from having quantitative data. It gives also the social data of the people who have an intimacy with places, and who are farmers in places, who still know and live their entanglement, and historical entanglement with places, which means other non-human actors.
So now we are in the middle of the second part of our discussion. We are trying to understand what works. So we know that something is not working in our way of talking about climate change, but we can try and find new ways of talking about it. So we have maybe a more effective and more realistic way of approaching it. Our third guest, Giorgio Vacchiano, a few days ago, he was attending COP26. So, you know, COP26 in Glasgow, you probably all know that there weren't binding agreements taken, so we didn't really take many steps in the direction of reducing our impact. So first of all, I would like to show you one of the delegates attending the meeting. He came from Tuvalu Islands. Many of you may have seen this photograph going around on social networks. So he was attending the COP26 from his homeland, and people attending the conference saw this man, the delegate, on a zoom in with his face only at the beginning of his talk that lasts like a few minutes, and then suddenly at the end there was a zoom out, and we saw him with his legs in the water. So this is also a way of communicating, of course. Let us listen to Giorgio Vacchiano, that was attending the conference, and this is his impression of this meeting.
I'm not sure I remember the first time I've heard about the climate crisis, but I surely remember the last, and let me share it with you today. That was in Glasgow. A couple of weeks ago, I was taking part in COP26, the international climate conference, when people from all the world and all the states were gathering to try and find solutions to the climate crisis. And I entered the plenary room in the first morning to hear the presentation by the IPCC, the UN body that collects all climate scientists of the world, about the status of our climate today. And I was hearing numbers and data that I knew by heart on the increase of global temperatures globally, the rise in extreme events and heat waves and droughts and forest fires, the rise of the levels of seas and oceans globally. But I was sharing the room at that moment with representatives of people that is already experiencing today these kind of effects and experiencing them in their life or in their death. So all of a sudden, these numbers took flesh around them and were numbers about the real lives of real people around the world. So this is why I believe that telling stories about climate change, of course, backing them up with solid number and robust science is important. These are not stories about the planet, stories about the temperature. These are stories about the people. And this is usually the things that we care about the most. So let's continue telling stories and let's put people at the square center of all our activities and research about climate change. I believe this is the only way to find proper solutions.
Stories. So we have already mentioned how important stories are, but also we mentioned another danger, which is that once we understand what is happening, we may panic, which well, yes, we started asking why we are not panicking, but we don't want to freeze. Certainly, we don't want to be overwhelmed with fear, and also we don't want to think that it's too late and that there is nothing we can do. There's no way we can have an impact towards a solution. So once more, I would like to introduce you to another scientist. Her name is Susan Solomon, and I find that her experience is particularly useful. So she is a climate scientist today. She started her career in the 80s, making a journey. Her journey in Antarctica. She was 30 when she went to Antarctica with a team, a scientific team. She went there to prove that the hole in the ozone layer was caused by CFC, that are those substances that are contained in products such as spray cans. And as a consequence of this journey, well, she was not the person that first thought about this cause, that CFC might be the cause of the hole in the ozone layer, but she was the person that in fact proved it with experiments. And once she did, Montreal Agreement happened, so the products that were the cause of the hole were first the production was lowered a lot, and then eventually they were banned. So there was a big effect from her research, and now she's one of the scientists that leads the panels, the IPCC reports. So in, I think, 2009, she was responsible of one of the groups that wrote the IPCC report. And she keeps saying that once, when she was younger, she saw the world sitting around a table all together and take a decision to overcome a problem, a global problem. Of course, there are many differences because the economic interests are different, because the problem is a little maybe less evident than a whole. A whole is something that everyone can understand, while climate change is different. But anyway, she insists in saying that this has happened. Governments from different parts of the world have actually agreed on doing something, and this can happen again, and she's certain that this is going actually to happen. And then there's another thing that she always likes to say, and is that she knows that talking about climate change is difficult because many people don't seem interested, don't seem to care, and she takes this like a big issue, and she has some advice. She says, when you explain what climate crisis is, you should make it personal, perceptible, and practical. So she has this rule, like 3 Ps: personal, perceptible, and practical. So I would like to ask you both, do you agree with this solution? Do you think that this is good advice? Have you also followed this piece of advice? So Andre Magnussen.
Yes, so my conclusion when I've been, the first time I was asked to speak to like teenagers about global warming, I presented the facts, you know, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, we're in the 6th mass extinction, and I felt like I was just turning off the lights in their eyes. I was like, I felt very bad, like I didn't want to be in this position, like telling them, sorry guys, you just came too late to the party. So I was really thinking, how do you talk about this? It's a very difficult thing just to, you know, I don't want to give them false hopes. You still have to tell them the truth. So it's kind of from what standpoint you come to the truth. So you know, like somebody says, I want you to panic. We don't really want to panic. You could also say, I want you to be professional. Like we have all sorts of professions of grown-ups and people that we have: ambulance drivers, policemen, firefighters, doctors, nurses. We have all sorts of people that are confronted with very difficult realities in their daily life of work. And it's not like you have to spare them the information. If you call an ambulance, you tell them what happened. And then the ambulance driver just comes, and it's not like the ambulance driver becomes paralyzed and says, oh no, is there blood? And you have to lie to him and say, no, 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 there's not blood. You just tell the ambulance driver what's happening, and he just comes and he solves the issue and does the best professionally he can do. And that's maybe another metaphor that we could look at. We just have to be professional. We have to look at the data, and then we just have to be like a paramedic or a firefighter and just deal with that reality. And then when you talk to young people, you tell them you're not unlucky to be born today. Or, you know, of course, there are people that are born into difficult circumstances, but in general, if I talk to my grandparents, life was not easy when they were children. You know, it was maybe like my grandfather, he lost his father when he was 11 and had to start working for his family. And you were not, and his grandfather had an even tougher life. And you were not unlucky not to be born in, you're not lucky if you were born in Europe in 1940. You know, that was a very difficult time in all of Europe. So every generation has had its challenges. So I tell them, scientists show us that this is the challenge, but science also shows us that we have the tools, the technical tools, and then the question is, do we have the social tools? Can we use the social, political tools, or are we so stuck in systems that we cannot rearrange our tools to fix the system? So I tell them that this is not essentially negative, because every single job, if you're 15 or 20 today, every job, every profession that you choose is about this challenge, the race to zero. That is, it's about if you become a designer, if you become an engineer, if you go into transportation or agriculture or tourism or culture, every single field needs to be revolutionized in the next 30 years. And that's not essentially negative to be part of the generation that does that. because you will also look back and you will not miss the 2020s as a time of glory, because your mindset will be so changed, and you'll just think like how barbaric those times were in terms of waste, in terms of food waste, in terms of habits of traveling, you know, just how barbaric the design of cities were. So I tell them, when we read history, we often envy people that were like in the time of maybe even in difficult times, in independence movements, and you know, we envy people that were alive when times were changing. And I tell them, sorry guys, but you are now during times of great change, and this is a challenge. It's not essentially negative to be part of this generation. It can actually give meaning to almost every single job that you choose. Like, nobody was cool in my generation that chose to become a waste manager, but now you see young people like enthusiastic, like, in the future I want to manage waste, and they're just, their eyes are gleaming. And when a child asks, why am I studying algebra, you just have to tell them, well, there are basically 1,000 gigatons of CO2 in the atmosphere that should not be there, and nobody knows how the hell to get it down, and that's why you're studying algebra. But then why am I studying ethics? Well, because somebody might find a solution that is not quite ethical and needs to be challenged. So because this has to be addressed in a holistic approach, but not with some simple technocratic solution. So I basically tell the kids, you know, okay, it is a big problem, but humans have gone through very great challenges throughout history, and the reason we are here now is because we overcame those challenges: cold and heat and hunger and diseases, and this is just the next challenge, and the outcome can actually be quite good in the end.
Now, there are several elements of universality that came out from our talk. For example, the simple fact that you spoke about myths and mythology as a language which is suitable for climate crisis is meaningful, and also concepts just like time, water, and air, also atmosphere, and the fact that Mauro, you also talk about how Margaret Mead, in now many decades ago, she said that the air and the atmosphere was something that was common to all cultures, because we cannot ignore atmosphere and air. So what I would like to ask you, do you think that all these elements of universality can in fact have an opposite effect, because we feel climate crisis like something so universal that doesn't really apply to us, and so it will never become local?
Yeah, I think the most important issue is how to frame, and not in catastrophic media language, how much climate crisis is very much local. It's local in its impact, but it's local in the possibility to challenge it and to make it shareable and to become the way to conceive the real change, also in terms of equity, also in terms of desire of relatedness, of taking care, of being protected by an environment which we start protecting, no? Because when we are trusted in a place where we live, then we are protected. We feel protected. We feel in a place where we recognize, which is not what is happening now, because people feel displaced in their homes, in their places, because they don't recognize anymore their forest, they don't recognize anymore their river, and many other contexts, or they lose resources. I think it's something which takes us in common, but this process has to really, I mean, it's really important to understand the great shift, and the younger generation very often are inside this big challenge of not just decarbonizing the economy as a technofix attempt or as a greenwashing attempt. We are completely inside those really strong trends of re-greening no old illimited growth, for example, no, which is really the big enemy in this process. But we need to decarbonize our imagination. And this is very practical, because on one side it has to do with changing the frames through which we desire reality. Stop thinking that nature is something external. Stop teaching that. Stop thinking, stop consuming, stop thinking that we are what we consume as something nice. We already saw the danger of that in decades behind us. And start, not just teaching, but start desiring a world where the relatedness is with other human agents and forests and rivers and atmospheric relations, and also start visualizing and also moral condemning carbon, which is invisible. But we are producing it also on the GoToWebinar and its data bank. I mean, it's not on the cloud, it's not in the atmosphere. This room, this digital room, it's consuming energy, no? So maybe less than the plane in this case, but start taking into account and making visible as a game, and also a moral condemnation, as something which becomes immoral, that we cannot externalize what has been easy to negate, which is the greenhouses effect, no, of what we produce very much on the ground with fossil fuel, which means taking about, I mean, the word of practical that you made in the other questions, doing something practical, and which is very much linked to having responsibility, but also which has ability to respond to this world, which has changed. And this means other way of relating to environment as agents and as interrelation. So also the very value of limits. Many cultures and non-Western cultures have valorized, have idealized even the fundamental value of limits to human action, which doesn't mean that we are limited, but it's a fundament of any culture. We have been in the carbon economy idealizing the unlimited, no? Which is also a divinized idea of human being, no? As if we were the creator. And then we get shocked, realizing that we were not the creator.
So this is the right time for anyone if you have questions. So if you, among the public, if there is anyone who wants to make a question or comments to what we have been saying, just step forward or just write on the chat on the right of your screen. We are almost, our time is almost over. Andre Magnusson, there's one particular thing I would like to ask you, because you have also been active as a politician. And I don't know if everyone listening to us would agree with this, but I think in Italy we have a very special situation concerning environment and politics. It seems that when a politician is active in taking into account environment issues and emission and makes an effort, he's almost never taken seriously, and it becomes immediately almost a childish character to the public. I guess in Iceland, nature is so overwhelming that I think this should not be the case in your country. How do people approach politicians that are committed to the environmental cause?
Well, I've never been a real politician actually, because I've always been a writer or an activist so I've never received a single dollar for working as a politician. My only run in politics was that I ran for president once, and the president is an independent figure in Iceland. So normally he's not part of the political establishment, and that was in 2016. And basically it was because, and the president of Iceland is, I think, like the president of Italy and Germany, more like a representative figure. not like a real political figure, but he can have some influence. So actually, when I ran, you could actually see this, that you could see that politicians were not very keen on very radical kind of environmental ideas, and often they were seen as unrealistic. But then the problem of reality today is that that not taking the environment into account is unrealistic. That shifts the reality from beneath our feet. And but also the realism, like Maro was talking about, that we are nature, we should not segregate us from nature. But often I've also said that, but we are also, sometimes I've said that I'm not 70% water, I'm 95% oil, because the reason that we are here, the reason for our kind of bulk of our civilization, is that we found these superpowers of oil, coal, and gas underground that enabled us to harvest and plow and raise and move masses around the globe. And these superpowers are now kind of not have shown that our super vulnerability also. So we're in this extremely difficult situation where kind of the fundament of our existence, which are the superpowers of oil, coal, and gas, are kind of diminishing the foundations of our lives, and we are in a race now in the next 30 years to compensate for these superpowers, because we can't really go without energy, because we can't go back to the era of muscle power or horse wagons. We have kind of lifted ourselves, even though we are part of nature, but we have still kind of lifted ourselves to a situation where we are very dependent on this technological existence that we're living in, machines and energy.
So thank you very much for your contribution. Thanks to all of you. Thanks Mauro Van Aken. Thanks André Magnusson. Thank you, Ais. Hi Francesca, I see you're back with us. So I would also like to thank Giorgio Vacchiano for all the videos he sent us. They were precious to our conversation. And of course, thanks